Beati. I'm a Senior Assistant Attorney General here for the state of New Hampshire, currently Chief of the Homicide Unit. With me is Christopher Knowles, Knowles, an Assistant Attorney General also assigned to this matter, and of course Chief Aldenberg of the Manchester Police Department, who has been here since the beginning. I imagine just briefly there's a couple of things I can say today, actually. Most of the time I can't tell you folks much, but today obviously it's after sentencing. So as you heard upstairs, the court did provide a sentence, and the sentence being essentially, when you add them together from the consecutive nature of how they were imposed, being 56 years to life sentence. These 56 years is consecutive to those that he has already been sentenced to in the other docket matter from last year of armed career criminals offenses, as well as theft by unauthorized taking, and that was an aggregate of 32.5 to 67 years. So in aggregate here, and I've been asked just a moment ago, I do not have the exact calculation, but certainly based upon the defendant's age at this point, I believe that he would hit his minimum parole date on these at around either 115 or 118 years old. But they are two consecutive sentences. That being said, today is truly about harmony, I would say, and I think you've heard that from all of the different victims' family members from here and from afar who were able to come forward and provide their statement to the court. The presentation that the state made obviously was trying to make sure the court found a good balance between punishment, deterrent, and rehabilitation. She certainly agreed with what the state's recommendation was, and that is what she has imposed. Again, I think what was also tremendous that you may have seen today is the men and women of the Manchester Police Department who were here, and all of our federal partners, state partners out there who could not be with us, some who were and some who couldn't be here, who helped make this basically possible by going and finding the evidence and presenting that evidence in front of the jury. At that point, I'm very happy to take any questions at any time, if anyone might have one. Go ahead, sir.
At the start of it, you obviously made that offer to Adam to tell you guys where.
Yes, I did not discuss any sort of plea offers that may or may not have been made outside of the courtroom. That was a recommendation. And as you may have heard me say to the judge, it's completely in the judge's control what the sentence would be. But the state was willing to change its recommendation from what it presented to the court if he was going to provide us with where she was. He admitted in closing statements and through even his opening statements that the jury could find him guilty of falsifying physical evidence and abuse of a corpse, directly which are on point dealing with where Harmony is, wherever she is right now. So with regards to that, I don't know that the argument that somehow maintaining his innocence works when that's what he articulated to the court about those two charges. We were very much hoping that he would share those details. He seems determined to keep those details to himself.
Did you have hope, though, that he might take you up today on that?
I did, certainly. And I think everybody who has been trying to find her had that exact same hope.
Mr. Gotti,
yes.
Are there any avenues for you to continue to try to get that information at this point?
At this point, I think it's up to the defendant, whether the defendant ever chooses to reveal that information to anyone or not. That is his choice. That doesn't mean that the search will stop or that the Manchester Police Department and their partners are going to follow up on leads that come in. But right now, we were really hoping that he would be able to share that information and be willing to do that. He chose not to. That's his right. But that's what he did today.
Is there any update on the search right now, where it's at right now?
I can tell you, I believe, was it, Chief, about 2 weeks ago was the last time that Manchester went out for another search that was done in a different area, similar to the same locations that we've talked about before. Unfortunately, they were not fruitful at the time.
And I thought that the judge gave him a suspension.
No, it would still be 56 because the way that the state's presentation that we originally proposed to the court, it's written in the sentencing memorandum, that 12 months on the abuse of corpse charge was the only one that was going to be served concurrent, so at the same time as the falsifying physical evidence charge. The court instead made it to be consecutive but suspended. So it's a consecutive suspended 12 months that's hanging over his head for him to maintain and for the next 20 years have no contact with those families.
So it's the same result?
Practically, it's the same result, yes, with the addition of the no contact order. But that's also something that the Department of Corrections may choose to put on him as part of a condition, but that's up to the Department of Corrections to do. So, were there any other questions that I could answer for anyone?
I'd love to talk to the Chief.
Certainly. I'm happy to let the Chief.
Chief, we first heard about this story from you 2.5 years ago, this case. It's been a really long road for you. How are you feeling today?
Nobody wins, right? I mean, it's a bittersweet day. You know, the team back in the room, I'm looking at them all now. I said this last time I stood up here. Jack, Max, Lieutenant, Captain Layton, Captain LaRochelle, Billy Tuss from the United States Marshal Service, who's been with this case from the get-go, Scott Riley. I don't want to leave anybody out, but yeah, it's a horrible, horrible case. You know, Mr. Montgomery had a chance today to, again, I've said this before, you know, yet another opportunity to do one decent, good thing in his life. And again, he passed that up. So we'll keep working it. We'll keep working hard to do our part to locate Harmony and bring her home. I'm grateful to the two attorneys sitting out to my right here who have been here from the get-go, and Jesse O'Neill as well, who was with us from day one. These are, I said it before, these are extremely talented people that work for the state of New Hampshire Attorney General's office. I don't think the state realizes how fortunate they are to have people like this that sacrifice many things in their personal life, their own time, after hours, weekends, nights, just like my team does. But so, gentlemen, thank you. Thank you to the team at the back. I'm thankful to the media who's kept this story alive and in the news and kept Harmony's face out there. I think that's critically important. So I'm thankful for that. Yeah, it's not a fun day for Manchester PD. It's not a, you know, we're not going to go back and, you know, be all smiles. We're grateful to the judge, Judge Messer, for hearing us, and for the jury for sitting through what they had to sit through for that period of time. So I'm thankful for the process and grateful to be where we're at. It's been a long road.
Chief, do you think the system has changed at all? Could there be another Harmony Montgomery out there now or in the future?
That's not for me to, you know, Manchester PD can do our part to make sure that doesn't happen. What happens beyond that in the partnerships that we have with other agencies that interact with children, we're working, you know, to keep those relationships positive. And my hope is that this never happens again. And I don't, you know, nobody wants that works in this field or works in the field with children. Nobody sets out for that to happen. So we'll continue to take steps to make sure that this does not happen again in the state of New Hampshire or anywhere else.
You're all set with the chief, and if you're all set with us, we're going to thank you for your time, and I believe that hopefully there may be some other family members here who are willing to talk with you. I don't know. But thank you very much.
Ben, could you quickly address the appeals process for Montgomery?
The appeals process?
Yeah.
Yes,
Did you get one?
yes, he certainly has a right to appeal the convictions that he's had here today. He has the right to sentence review, so he may seek that as well. Typically, sentence review is not done until after the appeals are over with. That's typical of how the court will act. But that process will begin. That usually takes anywhere from 24 to 36 months to complete.
Are you aware of them filing or planning to file any appeals?
I have not had a matter that's gone to trial where a person has not filed an appeal afterwards, so I would imagine that he will certainly file an appeal.
And if he discloses information about the whereabouts of her remains, could that factor into the appellate process?
Likely no. The appellate process is really designed to ensure that the law was followed by the court as the trial went forward. That's what that's designed to address. So if you were to share that information later on, that would be something else that we'd have to address separately.
One more quick question.
Yes.
There are 2 other weapons trials on the docket for this man.
That's correct. We have a status conference that's scheduled in a couple of weeks.
You will go forward with those.
At this point in time, we certainly want to review all of the acts that are going on today. You heard us mention those, that they are still outstanding, and that is certainly something that we'll take a look at and decide what's going to be happening going forward. But I'm not able to give any concrete answer on that status conference. It was enough to prepare for today and get today off the ground. That's another day to prepare for. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone.